Yeah. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. It's good to see you. We thank those who are here in present and those who are joining us virtually online. Thank you for taking time out of your day. We hope everyone is staying warm and avoiding any slippage. Someone had a good tumble this morning, and he asked me to caution everyone that it is still extremely slippery here in Memphis. Okay, before we begin, I want to thank Elaine Whitty for making a generous donation to Young Israel of Memphis's Rabbi's Discretionary Fund, where we made sure that those funds will go to good tzedakah purposes. And the reason she did this was to sponsor today's shiur in memory of her dear mother, Rebbetzin Rachel Gittel, Bas Harav Ephraim Visara, Aleh Shalom, whose yurtzeit is the 20th of Shvat, that's this Shabbos, and the sponsorship was dedicated Le'iloi Nishmasa as a merit for the elevation of her soul. And Elaine just gave me a couple biographical details about her mother. She says Rebbetzin Rachel Gittel, Aleh Shalom, was a passionate advocate for Jewish education. Together with her late husband, Rabbi Abraham Woody, Zichrono Bracha, she co-authored a book called Exploring Jewish Tradition, a transliterated guide to everyday practice and observance. And the family maintains a meaningful custom of mentioning always when they talk about their mother, mentioning both her father and her mother, because in particular in memory of the many loved ones they lost in the Holocaust, and they want to make sure that everyone's remembered. So Teheni Shmasot Shura B'Tzorah Chayim, may her memory be a blessing and a continued source of inspiration for her family and for all who benefit from her legacy. Thank you very much, Elaine. We appreciate your sponsorship. And our Torah learning today will definitely, we will have your mother, her dear neshama, in mind. It should be a benefit for her. Okay, so let's jump in. I want to share with you three Divrei Torah on Parshas Yisro. Let's see the first one. The first one is rather, I thought, short but powerful. Right at the beginning of the Parsha, it tells us, Vayishma Yisro, Yisro heard, and it tells us a little bit about who was Yisro, what was his station in life. He was a Kohen Midyan, he was a chieftain in Midyan. Chosein Moshe was the father-in-law of Moshe, and what did he hear? As Kol Asher Aseh Elokim LaMoshe Yisrael Amo. The news reached him about everything that God had done for the Jewish people and for his son-in-law Moshe. Ki Yotzi Hashem es Yisrael Mitzrayim. And of course, the greatest about this was the whole story of the Exodus, about how HaKadosh Baruch Hu had taken the Jewish people out of bondage, out of Egypt. Rashi tells us here, quoting a medrash, that Yisro had many names. It says Yisro, Sheva Shemos Nikrulo. Yisro, if you look in Tanakh, you'll see there are 7 different names that are ascribed to Yisro. He was a man of many names. And what were they? Reuel, Yeser, Yisro, that's 3. Chovav, Chever, Keni, that's 6. And then Putiel, that's 7. So there are 7 names that you will find in Tanakh referring to Yisro. Again, those are Reuel, Yeser, Yisro, Chovav, Chever, Keni, and Putiel. And then the Medrash that Rashi quotes, he doesn't go through all 7, but he tells us how did he earn several of those names. So he says Yeser. Why is he called Yeser? Yeser literally means additional. Al Shem Sheyiter Parsha Achas B'Torah. He's called Yeser because he caused a section to be added to the Torah. In other words, this part that we're going to see a little bit about a little bit further, but the story about how he looked and he saw how Moshe was judging everyone and he wasn't happy with it and he had some helpful suggestions how to proceed. We'll get there soon. But that's an extra portion that's in the Torah. And then he's known as Yisro. Why is he known as Yisro? He's called Yisro to indicate that when he converted, he fulfilled the commandments, and the letter Hosifalo Os Achas al Shmo. So he had an extra letter added to his name. Chovav, he's also known as Chovav, Shechivev Esatorah, that he really adored. It was dear to him. He loved the Torah, and that's why he joined Am Yisrael. And these are just 3 explanations that we're going to see that Rashi quotes from the Sifri, why of these 7 names that Yisro has, 3 of them are how he earned them. Those first 3 that Rashi says. I'm sorry, not the first 3. It's number 2, 3, and 4. It's Reuel is a different explanation. Reuel is because he's like a Reya, he's a friend of God. Yeser, there's an extra portion in the Torah based on his good advice. And then Yisro, he had an extra letter added to his name when he converted, and Chovav because he loved the Torah. Okay, Let's take a look, a quick insight, but it's a powerful insight from Rabbi Shlomo Margolis. We've quoted Rabbi Shlomo Margolis several times over the last year or two, and this was a rabbi that I had become aware of over the last couple of years. He was someone who had been a proud student of the Novardok yeshivas pre-Holocaust in Europe, and he made it to America, and he served as a rabbi for decades in Boston. So he has a sefer on Chumash called Darchei Hashlemus. So look, he has a beautiful insight on this Rashi. It says, Vayishma Yisro, Sheva Shemos Nikru Yisro. Yisro had 7 names that we find in Tanakh. Echad mehem hu Yeser. One of them is called Yeser, mipnei sheyiter parsha achas b'Torah, because there's an additional section, there's an additional set of passages, you might say, that's in the Torah because of him. And that's the section that we'll get to next. It has to do that whole discussion here with Moshe about how Moshe was judging Bnei Yisrael and his helpful suggestions. Okay, so that's what the Torah tells us, that he was called Yeser, but that's what Rashi rather quotes the Medrash. He was called Yeser because of the fact that there's an added section in the Torah because of him. So look where Rabbi Margolis' beautiful insight. V'hinei, stop and think about this for a moment. Afal pish inyan gadol ad ma'od hu la'osif parsha b'Torah. That's a big deal that someone had a parsha added to them because of them in the Torah. That is a huge deal. He was called Yeser because there's an added parsha, there's an added section in the Torah totally because of him. Mikol makom, nonetheless, what's the name that this parsha Hashavua that we're going to read this week, what is it called? Mikol makom lo nikras haparsha b'shem Yeser. It's not called Yeser. The name of the Parshas Hashavua is not called Yeser. Yeser. It doesn't go, okay, Shmos, and then we have Va'era, and then we have, we have Shmos, Va'era, Bo, B'Shalach, and then Yeser, and then Mishpatim. It's Yisro. If Yisro had 7 names, when we had to pick what to call the Parshas Hashavua, out of all the names, why did we pick Yisro? Why didn't we call it Yeser? Yeser's a big deal. He had an extra parsha added in the parsha, in the Torah. There's a whole section in here because of him. That's a big deal. Ki'im Yisro. But no, throughout Jewish literature, this Parshas HaShavua, this entire portion in the Torah is called Yisro. Of all the 7 names, why they call it Yisro? Why not Yeser? Yeser would have been a good name for the parsha, since there's a whole section in this parsha that was added totally because of him. So he says, Roi Mizeh, what do we see from this? Shelo ha'ikr hu b'hosafos parsha. As incredible as it is that there's a new section in the Torah that exists because of him, that's not the biggest deal. O l'chaber sefer. Even if he would have, let's say, authored a new work, as special as that is, that's not the biggest deal. Ella Iker, what's the most important thing? What is it that the Torah recognizes as the most important accomplishment? Bechibur atzmo. When a person works on themselves, when a person perfects him or herself, uvitiko midaso, when they really work hard to perfect their character traits. L'chein nikra shmo Yisro. That's why this parsha is always referred to as Yisro. Why? What was the significance of Yisro? Kishinizgayer. Rashi quoted the Medrash, says that when he converted, when he joined Am Yisrael, they added a letter to his name. Lahoros, this teaches us, Bahosofa zu shalaos vav, the addition of this extra letter of vav that he only got when he converted and when he joined Am Yisrael and became a better person. So that's Shinoi Mohuso Asmi, when he personally improved himself. That's the most important. So of all these 7 names, they're all cool. To be called the friend of God, to be called Ru'el, to be called Chovav because he loved the Torah. That's awesome. To be called Yeser because there was an extra section in the Torah added because of him. These are awesome names. But of all those names, what's the name that he becomes most synonymous with? And what's the Parshas HaShavua called? Yisro. Because that's the name that has to do, that signifies that he added to his own personal accomplishments, that he became a better person. And this should be a wake-up call to each and every one of us. What is the ideal in life that we should all be striving for? What can I do to become a better person? It's wonderful to have all these other accomplishments and to have a list of all the things I pulled off and whatever it is, that's great. But the biggest accomplishment we could have is tikkun amidos, improving our character and working on ourselves. What can we do to become a better person? Someone who does that, that is the crowning achievement. And that's, I thought, a beautiful, beautiful insight from that name. Okay, let's move on to page 2. Page 2 is Divrei Torah number 2. I love this one. I'm going to share with you a beautiful Abarbanel. We all know that Rav Dan Yitzchak Abarbanel was that champion of Sephardic Jewry that was around at the time of the expulsion from Spain. and he follows Klal Yisrael into Portugal, and then he leaves with them when they're expelled from Portugal. He was that champion of the Jewish people during that very, very tumultuous time, and he wrote a beautiful parish on the Torah. However, what's very challenging about the Abarbanel's parish on the Torah has been over the years just the way that it was formatted and printed. It could be very, very intimidating because there's not paragraph spaces there. So someone really needs to take their patience and not be intimidated. But over the years, I've seen some new publishers that are publishing it in a less intimidating format. They broke it down into paragraphs, which makes it so much more accessible. And I was so happy to find this is one of my favorite. Again, I'm not a great student of the Barbanel. I can't say that I've gone through all of his stuff. I've had a chance to see a sampling of his works. Of what I've seen, this is one of my favorite Divrei Torah of the Barbanel, and I was so thrilled to find it in a new format. It made it so much easier for me to find and to share with you. Let's take a look at what is the added parsha. If the Rashi told us that one of the names of Yisro was Yeser. He's called Yeser because there was an additional segment in the Torah that is only here because of his involvement with Am Yisrael, and that's what we're about to share. That Yisro takes a look at the way Moshe is judging the Jewish people. He's got some critiques on it, and he has some advice, and Moshe says, I'm going to follow through on that. Let's look at what he saw, what were his critiques, and what was Moshe's response. So on page 2, it's chapter 18, that's Parak Yud Ches, starting with Pasuk Yud Gimel. Vayihimi macharas. It was on the next day, meaning on day 1, that's when Yisro joined. They had a great conversation. They had a su'uda together, and he proclaims his appreciation for God. Next day, Vayimi macharas vayishev Moshe lishporas am. It was the next day, and what happened? Moshe sits down to judge the people. Vayamod am al Moshe min haboker v'ha'arav. And there's a line of people. They're waiting from dawn to dusk to hear from Moshe and bring their questions to him. Moshe es kol asher hu oseh. Moshe's father-in-law Yisro sees everything that he's doing la'am for the people. V'yomer, and he says, "Ma davar is that? What's going on here? Asher ato selam. What are you doing to the people? Madu ata yoshev levadecha. Why are you alone sitting? V'chol ha'am nitzav alechem min ha'boker ha'erev. And everyone else is forced to stand on line, waiting from morning to night." Tesvav. Vayomer Moshe lechosno. Moshe says to his father-in-law, "Look, I wish it could be different. However, ki yavo elai lidrosh elokim." The reason they're all standing in line is because everybody that you see standing is coming to me to seek out what is the Dvar Hashem, what is God's word. They want to seek out God's advice. Ki yelam davar. If anybody has a specific case, by they come to me, v'shafati ben ishu ben reyehu, and I act as the judge between one person and their neighbor. V'odati es chukei elokim, I let them know God's statutes, v'es torasav, and I let them know all of God's teachings. Yud Zayin, v'yomer chosei Moshe elav. So then Yisro's father-in-law says, okay, I get it. However, lo tova davar asher ata oseh. I'm not happy with the system you've got in place. Yud Ches, navol tibol, you will surely wear yourself out. Gamato gama. You can't continue like this. You're going to burn yourself out, and you're going to frustrate Klal Yisrael, Asher Imach, everyone who's with you. Ki kavein mimcha davar. This is too much for any one person to handle. Lo tuchalo solavadecha. You can't do this on your own. Yotes, ato shema b'koli. Now listen to me, son-in-law. Iyatzcha, I'm going to offer you some good advice. V'ya lokim imach, and God should be with you. Heye ato la'am. You should represent all the people mul elokim before God. And of course, if there's a question that really needs God's attention, you should bring the questions that they have to God. And you should be the one to teach them, admonish them according to the statutes, according to the laws. Let them know what is the path that they need to go on. Let them know what it is that they need to do. But now you should choose out from the entire nation people who have real substance to them. Their fear is of God. People who admire truth. That they hate monetary gain. And appoint over Israel leaders over the thousands, over the hundreds, over the 50s, and over the tens. Meaning deputize yourself. You can't be the sole sheriff, the only person here. You got to set up a very efficient system. Chav Beis, V'shaftu Esam, and all these deputies that you set up, they should be judging. They should be dealing with the people b'choleis all day long. V'yakol hadavar hagadol yaviu elecha, kol hadavar hakatan yishpetu heim. Matters of grave importance, okay, those should come to you. But the smaller stuff, let your deputies handle. V'akel me'elecha, this will make your life much more bearable, much easier. V'nasuitach, and you'll be able to bear this burden. Chav Gimel, if you follow through on my advice, that Sivcha Elokim, and God commands you and guides you, you'll be able to survive. But as it currently stands now, you can't go on like this, and the people can't go on like this. And all the people will be able to go to their place in peace. But as it stands now, it's bad for you, it's bad for Klal Yisrael. Chavdalid, what's Moshe's response? Vayishma Moshe lekolchos no. Moshe listens to what his father-in-law, even though it was a critique, Moshe listens. Vayas kol asher amar. And he says, thank you very much, Pop. I'm going to do everything that you said. That's what the Torah's account. This is the added parsha. This is how he earns his name Yeser. This is how he's called Yeser, because of this parsha. And this begs such an obvious question. Let's look at the Abarbanel. The way Abarbanel is structured, he does this like every chapter or two. He says, if you want to understand, you want to claim to understand the next chapter or the next segment of the Torah, these are the following, it could be 5, 6, 7, 10 questions that you must deal with in order to claim that you understand this next piece of the Torah. And here he lists, I don't remember what his list was. I don't remember if it was 10 or so, but we're going to look at question number 5. Abarbanel, again, I love this new printing that I found online. Look how he asks this. Ashela, hey, what's the 5th question that you must deal with in order to claim to understand, to have an understanding of this section in the Torah? B'atzas Yisro Moshe b'mino yashoftim. This great advice that Yisro gave Moshe about appointing judges. Hine divrei Yisro hayatovim minachochem. Everything Yisro said was spot on, was very logical. Avol kal shebekalim yavin v'yodeh. But even the person on the bottom of the totem pole would be the first to understand. Shaisa etza niv'ara la'amod adam echad min haboker ad ha'erev lishpot. The simplest member of Klal Yisrael would know it was a horrible idea for Moshe to be the single judge and standing from dawn to dusk, being the only judge to judge an entire people, numbering in the millions. Ki bezed naval yival, that'll surely unravel. It'll fall apart. V'yila shofet v'nishpatim. It'll be bad for everyone, both for the judge and the people being judged. Moshe Rabbeinu alav v'shalom v'chol ziknei Yisrael. How can it possibly be that this went over the head of Moshe and of all the Zakanim? Lo nasnu levu zeladas. They didn't think about this. She'im yimna shoftim alam shicham me'elav, that if they only would have appointed deputies, this would make Moshe's life easier and make life for the Jews easier. How could it be that everybody missed this until this one guy named Yisro shows up and says, I've got this mind-boggling idea. This is not rocket science. Umi lo yada b'cholela. Who wouldn't know this? And who wouldn't know what Yisro had such a good idea? Oh, they got to be honest and they got to be God-fearing. This is elementary. Yisro needs to teach the master of all the prophets, the Gadol HaChachamim, who's the wisest, Moshe Rabbeinu Avasham, the best teacher we ever had. Yisro has to teach him this. Moshe couldn't get this on his own. Ad shenemar, to the point that this whole section ends by saying, Vayishma Moshe lakol chosno. Moshe acknowledges, he listens to everything his father-in-law said, Vayas kol asher amar. And he says, and he does it. He puts it into action. How could it be that Moshe missed the ball on this and needed Yisro to tell him all this? This isn't rocket science. It's an awesome question. Furthermore, he goes, and Abarbanel will often do this. He'll say, I've looked into what the Christian scholars on the Old Testament say, and they picked up on this question, Keneged Adon Nevi'im, and they use this as a way to body slam the master of the Nevi'im, the master of the prophets, meaning Moshe. They speak very critical of Moshe. They look at this passage in the Torah, and they say, wow, they use this to take potshots at Moshe Rabbeinu. They want to say, okay, this is a good example of someone who's living in their ivory tower. They might have a good mind, but they just don't know how to put intellect into action, and they don't know how to govern properly. Umehem Amru, and some of them even weren't so bold as to say, because he was so living in the clouds with prophecy, he was lacking. He didn't know how to conduct himself in this world because he was just he was what they call him a Luftmensch. He's up in the clouds, someone up in the clouds, and he doesn't know how to deal with his common people. V'usheker! Abarbanel says that's false. That's what a chutzpah to say this about Moshe Rabbeinu. Ki shleimus midaso. Moshe was a beautiful human being who had beautiful character traits. Yorah chachmasabem, and that shows he was intelligent. He wasn't just some intellectual bookworm who didn't know how to deal with the world around him. Moshe was a master of the world around him. This is a terrible thing that these Christian scholars are saying. So how do we explain this? Vashem yisparach echlo lamdil das utvuna kalakazos. How could it be that God, with all the wisdom he shared with Moshe, didn't share with him such a simple piece of advice that Yisro offered? Good question, no? Yeah, very good question. So Abarbanel says you cannot claim to understand this parsha unless you address this question. I agree. So let's see, how does Abarbanel answer this? So it's a little bit of a long answer, but it's not. It's really concise. Let's read it together. He says now he's going to deal with this question number 5. So I skipped him because, again, the way he does it is he goes through all of his questions. So he already answered 1 through 4. Now is where he deals with 5. Now I want to answer the question I had asked earlier about the advice that Yisro had offered Moshe. V'omer, here's what I say. First of all, ki biyoshe Yisro ba koda matan Torah. There's a machlokas, but Abarbanel wants to side with the opinion of the Gemara. When did Yisro show up? Before the Torah was given or after? So he wants to say it's sequential, just like the Torah says it. He showed up before the Torah was given. The Torah had not yet been given to Am Yisrael. Therefore, Hayayoshev Moshe Lishbo, that's why Moshe was sitting and judging everyone. This was never going to be a long-term situation. This was only going to be until the Torah was given. Right now, Yisro showed up in that small window of time before the Torah was given. Therefore, Moshe could not yet deputize anyone to judge because no one had the information that he had access to. The Torah had not yet been given. Moshe hadn't taught Klal Yisrael the Torah yet. They had no way to act as judges because they didn't have the Torah yet. They were given some bare bones detail at Mara earlier, Chazal say. They were given Me'ikre Adinim, some of the just bare essentials. LaMoshe ifkod, those were given to Moshe. V'adayin lo tzivo Hashem she'iten adina naim liYisrael. And Hashem didn't say to share all of that knowledge with the Jewish people at Parshas Ve'ela Mishpatim, until Mishpatim, Kamo shebiarti, like explained there. So first of all, he couldn't appoint judges because they didn't yet have the information, that the Torah information that would be necessary to function as judges. That's his first point. Number 2, so he says because they didn't have this, Moshe had to act as the sole judge right now. But this is not a long-term solution. So he says, first of all, the reason why this was never a long-term plan. This was Yisro walked in during a very short phase in Jewish history, and of course this was never going to be the long-term solution, but for right now, Moshe was the sole judge. So why couldn't he say, okay, they don't have Torah knowledge, but why don't they just use their seichel? Why don't I appoint deputies who could just use their common sense? So he says that's also not a good idea. He didn't want to appoint deputies who he's going to say, listen, in a couple of days, the Torah is going to be given, we'll have a new legal system, but in the meantime, just judge everyone with common sense. That's not a good practice. So he says that also doesn't make sense. You can't say, okay, right now we're using common sense, but in a couple of days when the Torah is given, then everything's going to change. Not everyone's going to have the same common sense. You can't appoint judges. You have to have a universal system of law. If you just appoint judges, deputies, and say use common sense, it's not going to be universal. There's going to be a lot of machlokas. Everyone's going to argue because it's not a uniform system of law. Anyone who is found to be guilty is going to say, show me the basis for how you ruled. Where's the legal text? And he's going to say, I don't have a legal text. This is what my heart tells me. That's not a way to judge. You can't judge unless you have a legal basis. And right now, Moshe is the only one who has that access to information because he can ask God, how do I solve this case? Because the Torah has not yet been given. Furthermore, v'chein b'shemipnei eva v'sina o l'sibos acheros chayvu v'tzdiku es bali dinam. If all they were using was common sense, then the people who are found guilty are going to say you didn't have any good legal grounds to say that he was victorious and I was guilty, and you were doing this because of whatever vested interests you have, or you don't like me, something like that. There's going to be a lot of machlokes. Say, let's say, okay, we're going to go to a different set of judges. Deus b'nei adam is for same chalukos. Everyone thinks differently. This one will say you're obligated. This one will say you're innocent. So you're never going to have a uniform set of law. It'll be a mess. It'll be the Wild West. That's why for this brief point of Jewish history, everyone was coming to Moshe. Everyone wanted to go to one consistent, honest court. And here from Moshe, what is the verdict? Okay, so now the question comes back. So now we understand why Moshe was so exhausted. Moshe's exhausted and the people are exhausted. And now that's why Yisro says, I don't like what's going on. Bottom paragraph, Moshe Rabbeinu olav shalom. L'daito. So therefore Moshe right now knows. Shebaod yamim ma'atim. It's just another couple of days. Yikavlu es Torah. In another few days we'll have the Torah. K'moshe yedu yisparach. Just like God says, Botziacha, when He revealed to him at the snet, the burning bush, God told Moshe, Botziacha samim Mitzrayim. Soon after you take the people out of Egypt, Tavdunas Elokim al Harazeh. They're going to worship God on this mountain, meaning they're going to get the Torah. So therefore Moshe knows it's not long. It's a very short window right now and I can't appoint judges yet. Very soon, God will give instructions. What is the Jewish people's legal system? We just don't have it yet. Excuse me. Sorry about that. So therefore, Hayadaito, so Moshe's mindset was, Sha'az, after the Torah is given, Achrei Kiblu Torah v'mishpatim, after the Torah is given, B'yos lefneim seder v'nimus ha'mishpatim, after we're going to have a uniform set of law, Kishulchan Aruch, like a set table, Yimnes ha'shoftim, then I could appoint judges, Lishpot ha'am. Some to judge them. Lo b'omer svara, not just each guy saying, this is where my heart leads me. So this never was a long-term solution. Everything Moshe is doing right now was a very short-term solution. Top of the next column, Aval Yisro lo yedea mizeh davar. Yisro wasn't aware of this. Yisro did not know that this was just a short-term solution. So when Yisro shows up, Yisro thought, what Moshe is doing right now, just for a day or two, Ken Yatamid. Yisro thinks this is going to be a permanent system. That's why he says, Amarlo, and he says to him, Naval Tibol, this is a terrible system. It's bad for you, it's bad for the Jews. And that's why he has all this advice. Shimna Shoftim, Shiftetu Kfia Omed, and you should set up deputies, and they should give out this the law. Kasher Hayunogim Midjan. This is the system we have back in Midjan. We have a Supreme Court, then we have lower courts. V'gamayom Nogim came b'chol artzos hayishmelim. This is how the system is set up in all the Arabic countries. That there's a Supreme Court and then lower courts, district courts. That's when he starts giving him. You must not know about this, Moshe. So I'm going to tell you what's the system you want to look to set up, and what are the qualities you want to look for in judges. V'lo amar shayu chachamim. He never said that they got to be wise. Kilo chashav shi'alam Torah shi'adinuba. Because he never knew that you're going to have like a Torah that you have to be a real chacham for in order to give it out. But you just want to make sure they're God-fearing people who know how to take the basic written law and put it into application. That's what he says. So now the question is, okay, so why did Moshe respond the way he did? So he says, Moshe Rabbeinu alav shalom, Moshe Rabbeinu, peace be upon him, kidei lechabed es chosnu, in order to be respectful to his dear father-in-law, liosod Hashem l'reav, and also we have a concept in Tehillim that says that You don't just spill the beans. You don't got to just put it all out there. If someone told you something as a secret, you keep it as a secret. So Moshe has inside knowledge that very soon God is going to give us the Torah in another couple days. So that wasn't given to everyone. So Moshe doesn't share that. Lo higid lo inyan Torah. So Moshe did not reveal yet to Yisro that, Dad, I know what I'm doing, but just in another couple days, we're going to get the Torah and I'll be able to do this. Shiva Asin Lakabal. He didn't reveal that to him. V'lo hisvakech imo, and he didn't argue with him. Al minago b'shoftim. He didn't feel the need to defend himself and say, Dad, I'm not a fool. I'm not stupid. Cut me some slack here. I know what I'm doing. This is just for a day or two. He didn't do any of that. He just nodded his head and he says, good idea. I'm going to do it. Aval shama devarav, but he listened to Yisro v'shivu and he responded, Shekain yasa. Good idea, Dad. I'm going to do that. Ha'amnam lo asa hadavar, but truth of the matter is he did not do it till now. Mipnei etzasaso. He didn't do it even when he does it later. He's not doing it because of Yisro's stroke of genius. Lefisha kol asher yatsu haya b'leiv Moshe lasaso. Everything that Yisro suggested, that's what Moshe's plan was to implement. Aval bizmanu v'ofen haroy, but just in the right time, in the right set of circumstances. V'Yisro achla paga ha'etzazos. And Yisro, so to say, jumped the gun, and he felt the need to interject and make these suggestions, but he didn't introduce to Moshe anything he hadn't thought of. So why did Moshe defend himself? Moshe says it's more respectful to say, great ideas, Dad. Pop, I'll do everything there. So he says, last paragraph, he says, Hine imkain tzidko divrei Yisro kafi hanaga midyanis. Everything that Yisro said made perfect sense according to the way things were set up and structured in Midyan. V'tzedek ma'aseh Moshe kafiyah kavana elokis v'tzorach hasha. And everything Moshe did made perfect sense because this never was a long-term solution. This was just a very slim window that he was going to do this. Mipnei zeh b'sipur Mishnah Torah. Therefore, when this whole story is said over again in Sefer Devarim, yeches Moshe mina shoftim lahatzmo. When Moshe retells this story, he doesn't say we appointed all these deputies because of what my father-in-law Yisro said, because I was going to do this on my own anyhow. He just said it. This is what we did. We set this up, and he didn't give credit to Yisro over there. Excuse me. V'amar shaso achrei matan Torah. And there it correctly says that the system was put into place after the Torah was given. Zeu shnemar sham. That's what the pasuk says over there. So he says, he goes, Ki'enu emes. That is the truth. Even though the advice from Yisro came first, the system was never instituted until after Matan Torah. Zeh shnemar sham. That's what it says there in Devarim. Hashem Elokeinu diber Eleinu b'chorev. God spoke to us in Chorev. Lemar rav lachem sheves harzeh. You've stated it long enough at the heart of Omer Aleichem Ba'esahi, and at that point God said, Lo Chal, that's when I said to God, I can't do this on my own. Lefisha Azmana Shoftim V'lo Kodem Matan Torah. That's when Moshe appointed Shoftim, not earlier. Last lines, L'chei Nemar Khan. That's why it says here, Vayishma Moshe L'kol Chosno, that he listened to the voice of Yisro, Vayas Kol Asher Amar, and he eventually did everything he said. Retzel Amar, what does that mean? Sheshama Devarav. He politely nodded his head. Va'asa Devar Maskim Leitzaso. He made it like, oh yeah, I'm agreeing with you. But not now. And that's why he says later when it actually mentions its implementation in Sefer Devarim, he doesn't bring up Yisro again because this really truth of the matter was this was what was going to happen on its own. I love the way that Barbanel set this up. Our Barbanel's question was awesome, and I love his answer. His answer is so logical. He's saying Moshe wasn't off his rocker. He couldn't have set up a system of deputies now because the Torah hasn't been given yet. You wouldn't have had a uniform system of law. The only way you could do this is wait till after the Torah was given. So why didn't he argue? Because Kavod says, you're right. You're right, Dad. You don't have to constantly. How many times do I make that mistake? How many times do we all make that mistake? I'm so nervous. My sense of self-esteem is so fragile that if someone points out to me what I'm doing wrong, I'll automatically defend myself because I'll say, no, 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 no. I'm not ridiculous. I'm not stupid. I really was doing it. Sometimes, if it's our parents, especially doing it, it's our father, our mother, our in-laws, whatever it is, a spouse, just sometimes just nod in our head and say, okay, you're right. Even though I knew all that, even though I was going to do it anyhow, that's an element of kavod, to give kavod to my parents, to give kavod to my mother-in-law, to give kavod to father-in-law, whoever it may be, give kavod to my spouse. Sometimes just nod and say, yes, yes, good point. Yes, good point. I don't have to argue. I don't have to defend myself. Sometimes it's more covered to do that. I think that's a beautiful explanation that Abravanel offers here to answer up a very confusing piece, but it's a lesson to each and every one of us. When we're dealing with a parent, when we're dealing with an in-law, we're dealing with a spouse, sometimes let's just nod our head. I'm right. Okay, but I don't have to say that. Now let them think they're right. Let them think they're the Jews. There's more than enough covet out there. Moshe doesn't need all the covet. He could let the father-in-law have some. And that's the way it is with all of us too in our lives. We can nod our head to our mother, to our father, to our in-laws, to our spouse, and say, yeah, you're right. Good point. Good point. Even though I was going to do that anyhow. Okay. Let them think that they had it. Let them think that let them feel good about themselves. I think that's just so important. And that'll go so far in building relationships, maintaining relationships, and keeping peace between all parties involved. I think that's a great idea. I want to share with you one last one, a third Divrei Torah, and this is in the build-up to the giving of the Torah, the build-up to Har Sinai. I'm on page 5. On page 5, so the Torah says, "V'atayim shemoa tishma'u b'koli." If you listen to me, my voice, Hashem says, if you listen to my voice, ushmartem es brisi, and you observe, you keep my covenant, ve'yisam li segula mikol amim, you will be a treasure from all the nations of the world, ki li kol haaretz, because the whole world belongs to me, but you will be my treasured nation. That's what he says. You will be my segula. So I want to share with you a beautiful theory that I saw in the Tosefes Bracha. We don't have to read the whole thing inside, but here's what he says. Tosefes Bracha, again, remember this is Baruch Halevi Epstein. Did you ever notice that there are a lot of people out there with the last name Siegel? And what do many Siegels all have in common with each other? They're Levium. So Reb Baruch HaLevi Epstein, he was a Levi himself, and he says, he uses this pasuk, V'yisam li segula, to advance a great theory he has. His theory is as follows. Did you ever wonder why there's so many Levium out there, and it's become ubiquitous? It's within Ashkenazic thing, and I have it there. If you look on the bottom of page 6, I have it there. Look what it says from Wikipedia. Bottom of page 6, the second to the last item, Siegel and its variants, including Sagal, Siegel, different spellings. It's a family name which is primarily Ashkenazi Jewish. The name is said to be derived from the Hebrew Sgan Levia. That's like an acronym, Sagan Levia, which would mean like the deputy Levium, meaning like the Kohanim were like the upper echelon, Levium were next. So Sagan Levia could either mean the deputy, like the second most important group within Levi, or it could mean assistants to the most important. Sagan could be an assistant. So many people say that's what it means, and that's how you explain it. And then he says, although a minority of sources claim Siegel is instead not Sagan Levia, but Sagan Lekahuna, meaning assistant to the Kohanim. In other words, which could also be an acronym. Siegel could be Sagan LeKohanim, which might make more sense. You're an assistant to the Kohanim as a Levi. Okay, that's the theory that's out there. So Baruch HaLevi Epstein, going back to page 5, he says that's the most common theory that's out there. But he says, but I've got a question on that. Why don't we find Kohanim with the last name Siegel? He goes, you find in Mishnah all the time, there are a lot of people who are referred to as the Sgan Kohen Gadol. So in other words, there weren't just Sgan Leviim, like second most important Leviim. There also were Sgan Kohanim, Sgan LeKohanim. So he says, maybe it would have made just as much sense if you would have had Kohanim out there called Siegel, but you don't. It's just on the Leviim.
So, Sgan means second?
Well, Sgan can mean assistant to, or like deputy of, or something like that. So there were Sagan Kohanim out there in the correct. And there are Siegels out there who aren't Levium. Every now and then I meet Siegels out there. The first question I ask them, are you a real Siegel or a fake? Because you got to remember Jewish surnames over the years, a lot has changed, you know? But Siegel traditionally was a surname for Levium. In fact, the Taz, one of our great leaders, and you'll find his commentary in the Shulchan Aruch, the Taz, his name is always referred to as David Halevi Siegel. And again, he's living in the 1600s. So even though most Jewish communities didn't start picking up last names until later, a century or two later, Siegel was a very common family name for Levium. So he wants to offer a different theory. You know what his theory is? He says his theory is, it's all based on this pasuk. It says, V'yisam li segula. V'yisam li segula means you will be my treasured people. And Reb Baruch HaLevi Epstein has the following theory. Initially, all of Bnei Yisrael was called a segula, a treasure. And you know what? Because we were all a treasure, who were the Kohanim going to be amongst all of the initial plan? What was the initial plan? Who were the Kohanim going to be amongst Klal Yisrael? The firstborn. They were going to be Kohanim. And then what event happened? Egel Azav, the golden calf. After the Egel Azav, who's the only tribe in totality that did not sin in the Egel Azav? Levium. So his theory is as follows. Once the entirety of the Jewish people sinned in the golden calf and they lost the status, we're not going to have Kohanim from the whole tribe, but just from the tribe of Levi. So now that term segula, being called my treasured people, only applies to Shevet, that special status of being my Hisam Li Segula, my Am Segula. It can't apply to the entire that term in a sense. We still are God's B'ni Bechori, his firstborn nation. We're still his Am Segula, but that really special status of Segula, of being my treasured group, that really can only be said purely about Shevet Levi. And he wants to say maybe the name Siegel specifically because it was on Levium. Correct. Now, even Kohanim are part of Shevet Levi. So someone who is a Levi automatically comes up that they're from Shevet Levi. So that name became synonymous with Shevet Levi was Siegel because they're the ones who took the reins, you could say, of that Segula status. That's his theory that's out there. Very interesting. I never heard that before. But in the middle of all this, and I want to conclude with this, he gets on a little bit of a tangent. He says, while we're on the tangent, I want to tell you about my own last name. Baruch Halevi Epstein. He says, let me tell you about our family tradition about our last name. So look on page 6. So page 6 on the top. Vayan ki milsa al b'shayu yakira. He says basically that's a Talmudic phrase that's out there saying like once we're on this topic, I'll dress it up with a nice something very beautiful. Ani b'nei Sheva Levi. I personally am a Levi. Karni yarum betoldos hishtalshus mishpachti b'sfarad. Even though I'm as Ashkenazi as they come, our family tradition is we originally were from Spain. He goes, and which makes sense. A lot of those Spanish families, when they got expelled from Spain and then Portugal, so they find their way first to Amsterdam in Northern Europe, and then they come on down to Germany and then into Poland. So that was really the migration. So many of those old Sephardic families totally integrated into Ashkenaz, took on Ashkenazic customs. Some, like in Holland and in Amsterdam, there they set up Spanish Portuguese communities and they maintained them. But many of them, when they moved down into Ashkenaz, just totally subsumed themselves into Ashkenazic society. He says that's what happened to my family. He goes, our family tradition is we're originally from Sfarad. Asher Makora Nova Me'agolos Gola B'Yerushalayim. He goes, our family tradition is that we were originally in Spain, and Spanish Jewry originally came. They were the ones, the exiles of Jerusalem. Lachar Churban, after the Beis Mikdash was destroyed, the Sfarad. They were set up in Spain. Ushma Hamikori. What was our original family last name? Ben Beniste. There's a very famous Sephardic last name, Ben Beniste, and sometimes it's pronounced Ben Viniste. So, and there was some I think the Knesset Hagdola was the most famous rabbi with that last name. He was a famous rabbi in the 1600s, living in the Sephardic world, Ben Beniste. So it says the Knesset Hagdola says that was our family's original last name. That's our tradition. V'sotzi harbe arazim gedolim b'torah v'chachmas Yisrael yedun lanu zeh ka'elef v'chamesh me'el shana. Because we have a family tree we could trace back on 1,500 years. He says that talks about all of our famous relatives. And he says that's why I got onto this tangent because about talking about Siegel and Levi. He goes, I have a personal stake. I've always been fascinated about last names. Let's go to his footnote now. Look what he says here. So now he says, so where did the name Epstein come from? This is fascinating. We're in a class today. We're talking about the name Siegel and the name Epstein. Oh my gosh, that didn't dawn on me. No, it just hit me now as I'm looking at you. Right, Eileen. Oh my gosh. This is
You got that from the
no, it just hit me now. This is the Eileen and Sam Divrei Torah. Oh my gosh. This is incredible. It just hit me now. I knew Eileen, but I'm thinking, oh my God, then I'm saying Epstein. Oh my God. Okay, so look what he says. He goes, now that I've got my theory on where did Siegel come from, look what his theory about Epstein is.
That's why she married him.
It's fascinating. This never hit me. Oh my God. This is fascinating. So look at this footnote. He goes, V'sibas chiluf kinoi mishpacha ben v'nistei l'Epsteinu. Why? What's our family tradition? Why did our name change from Ben Beniste, which was a real Sephardic last name, to Epstein? He beis Gerush Sfarad b'shnas Reish Nun Beis. At the time of the Spanish expulsion, it should be 1492. That's a misprint there. It's not 1940, 1492. Sha'az yatsa b'gola gam mishpacha. This family, our Ben Beniste family, also got expelled from Spain. The Kinas HaKanoim hipila Magur, and based on all the jealousy of our non-Jewish people. We were chased out. Umachta gam al artzos hasmuchos l'sfard, and we had to flee from even the nations and the places that were close to Spain, meaning even Portugal and other places. Makom hatofas umipnei ze hayu hamishpachos hagolos mefachdos loses alein kinoi mishpacha kazu. Therefore, people were scared to continue keeping the last name. In other words, they were being pursued. There were people who knew that that was a name of Spanish Jews, and there were people who were chasing us down. Especially, I don't know if he means the church was chasing us down because of we were expellees from Spain, or if he means people who knew we were expelled because we had something they wanted, some resources. It wasn't clear to me what he meant by that, but he says people were hunting us down. Asher tivo chasmo bituyov kulo amar Sfardi. In other words, anywhere you went with the name Ben Veniste, everything about it screamed, I'm one of the Spanish expellees. And people were trying to, so to say, just go incognito. They didn't want to be known as that. Kulu Omer Sfardi, Kashem Ben Meniste, V'merutzas Gulusam, Shal B'nei Mishpachti. So when my family was going deeper and deeper into exile, Boad Ayara Achas, they came to one small town, Katana Bebedinas Ashkenaz. They came to a small town in Germany, Beduchtis Hessen, and they were in the Dutch, in not the Dutch, it was under the control of the Duke of the Hessians. You know, they talk about the Hessians. The Hessians were one of the Bavarians, like dukedoms that existed in the German, monarchy. Germany was not always one united state. It was a whole conglomerate of little owned by little dukedoms. I don't know what you would call them, like the little dukedoms over there. So it was the Hessians. The Hessians played a big role in the American Revolution. They had mercenary soldiers that were over here helping fight the British and stuff. So he says, what was the name of that town? Epstein. The name of the town was Epstein, and there he spelled it with two P's. You'll see in a minute. Ubnei Ir, the people who lived in that town, Kiblu es Hagolim Ba'ava. The Jews who lived in Epstein, they took in the Spanish expelled Spanish Jews who found their way there. They welcomed them with open arms. Uveratzon. Vehemsiu lehem menucha v'shalva. They finally let them settle down. We'll help you get set up. We'll help you get back on your feet. V'yeshvu yachsubo. And they settled there and they did well there. Ve'echad me ha'av agon Rabbi Nassan Halevi Epstein niskabel tekef. One of them, he says, Ve'echad mehem rather. One of them was a great rabbi whose name was Rav Nassan Halevi Epstein. Niskabel tekef larav. They immediately made him into rabbi. I've based in Frankfurt al Main. Frankfurt the Main. That's the famous Frankfurt that we always hear. There were two Frankfurts in Germany. Frankfurt the Main because it was on the river Main, and there was Frankfurt the Oder because it was on a river called Oder. So the famous Frankfurt we always hear of Rav Hirsch, that was Frankfurt the Main. So he says, one of my relatives, they saw he was a real Talmud Chacham. They immediately made him into a rabbi in Frankfurt. With Torah Zeh, and what did they know him as? Hagon Rav Nassan Halevi Epstein. Why? Because he had come there from the town of Epstein, but he was really a Ben Beniste. He was really Sephardi. Niskar B'Shal Shuvas Maril. Those are really early Ashkenazic Rishonim, the Maril and the Mari Mintz. Those are the earliest of Ashkenazim, and he's already mentioned. L'chein, L'os Toda, as a sign of appreciation, Kiblu Agolim Aleihem, all the Spanish Jews who made their way to Epstein, as a way to appreciate the Jewish community there that welcomed them with open arms and set them up on their feet again, they all took on themselves a Shema Irazos, Lakino Mishpachtam, as a surname for their families to always remain grateful to how they took us in. They took the name Epstein. V'ko nishar Shem Ayira Ayikra Epstein, and to this day in Germany, that town still exists called Epstein. Lekinoi Mishpacha Zo Arayom Hazeh. And this family, anyone you see with this last name, they've decided, none of them ever reclaimed Ben Veniste. They kept the name Epstein. Look at the last item on the sheet. It says Epstein. And it says there, it is a town in the main Taunus Kreis in Hesse, Germany. See again, Hesse, the Hessian region of Germany. Epstein lies west of Frankfurt am Main. Again, that's where his relative went to. 12 kilometers northeast of the state capital of Wiesbaden, and is at the edge of the Taunus Mountains. The ruins of Epstein Castle is a prominent landmark and houses a museum. And now also on Wikipedia, I just ran out of room. So here's the name under that. Just type in Epstein on Wikipedia. The surname Epstein, also sometimes spelled with two P's or Epstein, is one of the oldest Ashkenazi Jewish family names. It's probably derived from the German town of Epstein in Hesse. The place name was probably derived from the Gaulish, meaning these ancient German names of Appa or Eppa, which means water, or in a sense a river, and German Stein, which means stone, like a hill. So it probably was a hilly region where there was a river running through. That's probably how it got the name Epstein. Now it has a list here of very famous Jews with the last name Epstein in different fields of accomplishment, in the arts, in business, mathematics, military, religion, science, medicine, social science, sports, politics, law, writing, journalism, other fictional characters. So on this list, of course, you'll find Baruch Halevi Epstein. Unfortunately, there's one name on this list that's been in the news a lot lately that none of us need to mention his name here. None of us are proud that he was a member of the tribe, but that's his last name there too, and he made it to this list there.
Clearly Jew.
Yeah, he was clearly Jewish, but that's someone that no one wants to claim. It's like you can have him back. You're more than happy to say to that town of Epstein if there's any, and that doesn't mean everyone with Epstein that name is Jewish. There could have been plenty of people in that town when they had to take surnames could have taken that name as well. But this seems to be the common denominator that anyone who has that last name Epstein probably could trace their lineage back to this place. I have heard of in the Sephardic world, there still are out there called Ben Beniste. Ben Beniste.
This is really a Yekish area.
Correct, but some of those Spanish expellees, not all of them went to some of them went to Turkey. Some of them, not all of them. His branch of the Ben Beniste. Yeah, he's the Aruch HaShulchan.
No, I'm saying that you're saying
They became
Shulchan was a Sephardi and now he's a
his ancestry was Sephardic, but hundreds and hundreds of years ago, 600 years ago, he says that's their family tradition, is that they were part of the Ben Veniste family that found their way to Epstein in Germany, and it seems like they totally settled in and they adopted Minhag HaMakom. That they said, there wasn't any back then. You had one kehillah. You didn't have a Sephardic kehillah. The kehillah was an Ashkenazic kehillah. They took on all the Ashkenazic stuff. So there's not an ounce of Sephardic minhag left in him. But he's saying our family tradition is that we're originally from Sephardi.
your family.
Yeah, this is wild. It only hit me when I got to that footnote. Is that we discussed Siegel and Epstein at the same. This is yeah, that's right. Okay, let me hit the stop record. If anyone has anything that they want to